Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gabby Reece Show. On this show, we discuss the complex topics around relationships, health, fitness, family, business, and so much more with the world's leading experts. My goal is to simplify these topics and give you practical takeaways that you can start using in your life today. We all know that living a healthy, balanced life can be challenging. So let's try managing life a little better and have some fun along the way. Because after all, life is just one big experiment. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Robby Sansom. And Robby is the co-founder and CEO of Force of Nature. And I'm really interested in this topic because I personally am always looking for really highly sourced animal protein. And if you go to markets or very specific markets, it's pretty expensive. But what you start to realize is if you can go online, there's companies like Force of Nature that do everything in the most cooperative way with nature. And yet, when you can order it, it's actually the cost is more manageable. And something interesting for me personally is I find I eat a lot less animal protein when I have a really high quality sourced protein. And what I appreciate about what Robby's doing, because it is daunting, it's not even 1% of the planet is doing regenerative farming, but you're seeing more and more companies like Force of Nature and people like Robby that are working together. So they're working with land stewards and ranchers and farmers to do regenerative farming and really get a positive return to the planet. I think that we've realized, and I'm not really interested in, continuing to focus on what is broken. What I'm really interested in doing is talking to people and learning from people about ways that we can all collectively fix it. So Robby, thank you for joining me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Not only, obviously, I'm interested in this space of, this is one of the biggest, maybe it is is it the biggest extension of health? I'm not, it's like right there. It's sort of like our personal inward health, our mental health. But I mean, what you're doing with regenerative, and in this case with animals and with meat, food, and then the connection of the planet. And I think a lot of us have this idea of what the notion of regenerative farming or raising animals in a regenerative way really is. But I think there's so much to know about it. And I was really excited because food's the hardest thing. It's the hardest, even when you're trying to be healthy. It's the hardest part of, I think, the journey of trying to really maintain health.
I think I think everything you said is spot on. And what I think is most, fascinating, maybe, disappointing is that all you said is true. And yet we've lost touch with our food. We don't have the relationship that we evolved to have with our food, whether it be the experience or the form in obtaining that food or the form the food takes. And, I think the more we distance ourselves from our, what it is to be human, I think the more we see our health suffer for it, right? At least that's my opinion, and I feel like there's a lot to be explored there, and I think regenerative represents a good bit of that.
Before we actually break down regenerative, I'd really love to know sort of your journey. And it was interesting for me, like I looked through all the people that also work with Force of Nature, which is the company that you have co-founded. Like so many people are from Texas or Virginia. I know the accounting person is from the Philippines, but I was like, oh, this is a down home crew that's been at this a long time. And I thought that I just got a kick out of that. So you went to U of T, but maybe you could just say how you landed in some of the places that you've landed and now finally here.
Like you said, back to school, just did what folks did. You followed sort of the academic path, and doors were open, and you were sort of herded into a direction. And not to sensationalize, but I feel a little bit like we're all like lemmings doing kind of what we're instructed, and we don't question or sometimes stop and pause and think critically about it. And I just no different. I followed the path, got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. I went to work for a large consulting firm, and sort of started to figure out that that path that I was on wasn't fulfilling. I was making a paycheck, I had a job, but I don't think folks aspire in their youth to someday have a job. They hope to do something that's meaningful and that inspires them and that they're proud of and enjoy and can share and what that means to them with others. And I found myself on that path. And I think what I did that was unique is broke free of it, sort of just stopped and started talking to people and listening, and found and heard so many stories of regret. I wish I would have changed my path and followed my passions. But I haven't, because, I got a degree in this, or I got to pay my student loans, or now I got a kid on the way, or now I got a kid that's about to be in college. Well, now my kid's in college and I got to pay for it. And, oh, now I'm too committed to this and it's too late to go a different direction. And so they just sort of accept the circumstances that don't really fill their cup. And I just didn't want to do that. So I left, went into the startup space, found that you can, I enjoy business. I think you have businesses. There's parts of that are exciting. I think providing value to people, and when you hear stories of from folks that have worked with you, that you've changed their life, or you've improved their health, or you did these things, these are the sort of rewarding things that we do it for. And you can do that in mission-based companies, where you can do a good thing and get to tool around in business and see how the puzzle pieces fit together and kind of do problem solving, and work with people, whether they be consumers or employees. And so that's a little bit of kind of my path to get to here. I think ultimately I grew up hunting and fishing and spending time outdoors and swimming and sports. And, that's just who I fundamentally was and what I love doing. And, being able to join forces at a company, one of the second startup I joined was called Epic. I don't know, we've done some work with y'all in the past.
I love Epic. And I have to just really quickly slide in. I always was sort of fascinated, like, how are they pulling that off? Like for me, I thought what they're doing is so specific and so hard, and yet they're pulling it off and growing. And I was always really, I just really was, it was inspiring, because I think it's a very hard space to be in. And I really appreciated that. So wait, before you tell me about Epic, were your parents, I mean, I know you say, hey, you got outside and all of that. Was there this sort of health conversation, or was there an activism? Was anyone particularly interested in the way soil or agriculture is in your family, or was that something that you were introduced to only later?
I have great parents, and they definitely instilled a lot of values into me, but I can't say, my mom, followed the guidance that a good, well-intentioned, mother might, square meals, the food groups, the pyramid, the things that we were told that you should do, and I think, and my parents would, also do things, I didn't grow up in the age of social media and all of those things. So we kind of got locked, it was sort of like go outside and don't come home until it's dark. And, you use your imagination and your body to find joy in life and relationships.
I always loved that food pyramid. I think it's still in books today, but that ship takes a long time to turn. It's a big turn.
It's happening though. We're seeing it.
It is. I mean, well, because we obviously, clearly it's not working. So how did you end up well, actually, I think there's a lot of people that feel that way, what you're saying, like they're doing something because it's life they went along and they sort of went with the flow and they arrived at these places. Did you have a strategy when you thought, you know what, I'm not going to just take this paycheck and do this job? Was there a strategy around that before you just kind of pulled the cord, or what was your approach to saying, I'm going to make a change in my life and kind of create a different reality for myself?
And I have a background in finance, so I knew I could figure out a way to make it work and hustle and be scrappy. And I started businesses starting when I was 16. I painted houses through college and sold paint jobs, and So I wasn't afraid of the financial aspects of it. I knew I could find a way to make it work, and I didn't really care. I knew I could go get a paycheck if I really needed one. I just I knew I was going to live lean, and I wasn't going to put expectations on myself. And I said I'm going to take a minimum of 6 months. And I found a plan, and it involved a lot of peanut butter sandwiches. But it really, it meant also I had to schedule 2 meetings every day, and I had to work out twice a day.
Where did you strum up the meetings? Because I think people, it's like even when people look for a job, like where'd you strum them up?
Yeah, well, it was, it started off, I was just interviewing people. These weren't pitches or anything. It was me listening. It was me saying, hey, you're doing something interesting. I'd love to hear more about it. And, effectively asking them how they got there and what they love about it and what they would do differently, as I was trying to find a course. And, the main thing coming out of everyone, besides listening and learning about their journey in hopes it could help me find a path for myself, I would ask them to introduce me to one other person that they think I would be interested, that might have something to share. So it sort of set itself up that way. And so, well, financially, I think there's these myths and these, ways that we were conditioned, like, oh, if you don't have a paycheck, it's like, no, I financially, I made the least amount of money I ever made, but I was probably as busy as I've ever been and fulfilled, talking to people and learning and being outside and running and climbing and swimming and biking and constantly in social groups. And it sort of gave me a very interesting perspective about, how you can exist outside of an identity of who you are at a job, and even what a job is. And I have this notion that I think work-life balance is bullshit. I think the implication that there's 2 opposing forces on a scale, and in order to gain in one avenue, it has to come at the expense of another, is sort of the wrong ideal to set. That there's a give and take in the things that you're going to do, and frankly, you spend more waking hours on average at an 8 to 5 working than you do at home, so you lose. It's game over from the day that you buy into that dogma. And I feel more along the lines of, work-life synergy or congruency, right? Like, what are you going to do professionally that helps you pay your bills, that fills your cup and that inspires you and spills over into your personal life and makes you a better parent or sibling or husband or friend, and vice versa. That who you are and personally makes you really good at your job, because the two go hand in hand. And home is always going to be a priority. Family is always going to be a priority. That's non-negotiable. But to think that what you do for a living has to compromise those things, I think is a flawed way of looking at life, and that you should find the thing that serves them.
Do you think you were born with that? Because that's a very unique and kind of hard. I don't, my husband has a very similar attitude, and we're always, it's like, I see that and I'm like, you are so right. And I'm all trying to keep all the plates spinning at the same time, if that makes sense. Do you sort of think that you just had a sense of that always, or after taking a job and kind of going through a system, it was like, oh yeah, no, this isn't going to be the path that takes me there?
That thing that you hear when you're younger that frustrates the hell out of you, and somebody tells you, oh, well, if you do what you love, success will follow. Well, that's like the best guidance I can give somebody, but it sounds like like you're just being led on, when you're younger, and you're like, well, that's easy for you to say. But there's truth in it, and I really believe it. And I think, going through, and I think for me, my own experiences and talking to so many other people, that saying, I don't know who to attribute it to, many a false step was made by standing still, comes to mind. Don't just accept the miserable existence that you have because it's familiar. If you're not inspired, make a change, and the risks aren't as great as they seem. And I figured, I was lucky enough to figure that out. And then through doing it and building comfort like we do, as we, are able to accommodate greater loads of stress in our lives, I was able to lean into it more and more over time.
I think that's a really interesting point, about an important point about unearthing. I think very few people are born into the world connected with their sort of purpose or passion, and that it is a process of discovery. Because a lot of people are like, I don't know what I want to do. And it's like, I'm like, I don't think most people do,
No,
I
and
mean,
then this expectation, like you figure it out when you're 18 and you commit to a path and you better never,
yeah,
you're all in for the next 40 years and you can't be nimble or pivot or go through seasons of change and evolve. It's like, no, that's what you must do.
yeah. So you're saying the second company that you got involved with was Epic. Is this right?
From a startup perspective, yes.
Yes. What was the first? Was it food oriented?
No, it was really an information products company, so training. And during the financial crisis, we put out a bunch of content, helping banks, real estate companies, and homeowners find a way to stable ground outside of having losing their homes. This was during the early teens or early 2000s, excuse me. And being foreclosed on and filing bankruptcy. That's sort of, a death sentence financially for folks. And so we were able to help, millions of families avoid that through some training programs and some small business training that we did. And it just grew really rapidly. It was, I think, number 21 on the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies and things like that. It is no longer around. But we had a pretty wild ride. And I think I was in my mid 20s and at one point had 100 people rolling up to me. And, it was definitely formative years for me in learning how to lead, what behaviors are, and values, work when you're trying to inspire people and what, creates a toxic culture and how to navigate the two. And, I think, and again, that was sort of my first foray into realizing, hey, you can have a mission that serves people, and there can be a capitalistic component to it. These things aren't mutually exclusive. It's okay to make money and there to be a value exchange that works, and simultaneously be serving other communities. I think of what I refer to that as a triple bottom line. People, planet, and profit. You can't sit on a one-legged stool or a two-legged stool. You can't only serve one of those. But if you serve all three, you have something that works and is sustainable in its own right and worthy of pursuit.
It's interesting. I'm sure you feel this way. Like, I look around and I kind of see some of the way the businesses or practices are. And I think I can appreciate that these people, whoever they are, that are making a lot of money, but sort of being really destructive at the same time. I'm always fascinated at thinking how they don't think it's coming back on them. It's like, if it's clean air or water or the food quality or whatever, it's like, well, your family's going to eat, you're going to breathe the air. It's an interesting thing of like, I'll get what I can get right now. And it's like, well, but if you are considering all the components, like you're saying, the planet and the other human beings that we're with, I wonder why we don't teach that in business school. And I know it's not as profitable or as quick, but it feels like the long end of that story. I don't know how we don't realize that we'll run out of runway, by doing it just that way. Okay. So Epic, how did you get involved? Why did you say, yes, I'm going to get involved with this company? What about it was you thought, oh, okay, because I'm sure you did your homework and, ran numbers, and these are hard things to take on. What was it about it that you thought, this is going to be my next adventure?
Coming out of that initial, that first startup, I think eventually that unwound as myself and the CEO sort of parted ways, and we just weren't seeing eye to eye on where to take that business. And I was looking at the next move, and I had an opportunity to go, lead a private equity backed roll up of acquiring a handful of companies and combine them and try to flip it and do all this stuff in the logistics space. And again, it was sort of an exciting opportunity on paper, and probably a really good opportunity if you're a finance person, but it really wasn't in the same vein as, I didn't have, the mission wasn't there for me. And it was interesting, and it was very secure, and it was sort of it was just an opportunity I couldn't say no to. It was too lucrative. And two of my really good friends, Katie, who I grew up with in the same neighborhood, and Taylor, who I went to middle school and high school with, and who later fell in love and started Epic. I'd kept in touch with them, and it was a neat little concept. They had a vegan energy bar company called Thunderbird Energetica, which eventually turned into Epic as their food values changed. And
wait. Hold on.
Trust me, I'm getting there.
No. I mean, I love this idea of food values because, that's the other thing. We've managed to make even that kind of contentious between people. Like you have to eat like this or you have to eat like that. I just find that really interesting that they were able and willing to pivot kind of based on who they were becoming, sort of now their reflection even in their business. I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, and they were performance athletes, and at the time we're talking early, mid to pre-teens, but right around there, around 2011 or so, I think. I think they were following the conventional guidance and wisdom. And there was you look at a lot of the nutrition and health influencers, they went through a period of time of being vegetarian or vegan.
Yeah.
And I think these are folks that are on the cutting edge, that are paying attention, that are reading research and looking at what's coming out. There was a lot coming out that was promoting those values. It was promoting certain, well, I call them myths now, but it was creating awareness to potential challenges in food systems, and promising certain health outcomes and benefits. And I think they went down that path and bought in and tried and loved some of the stuff that came from it, particularly a set of values that honors land, that honors animals and their welfare, and that respects humans, whether that be on the production side or whether that be on the consumption side, and seeks to basically have an elevated consciousness in and how and what you consume to care about something greater than yourself. And I think that permeated through the brand that they had established, even when the food itself changed. And it changed, for them, they were having health issues, GI issues, inflammation issues. The vegan diet wasn't working for them as advertised. In fact, it was creating pretty significant challenges. And when they made a change in their diet, they saw significant and immediate benefits. And myself, I was, had a similar experience prior, and other folks I've known have had similar experiences. And so it was really trying. It was sort of like, oh no, wait a minute, you can't have meat and all those positive outcomes. And that was really what we had thought and been conditioned to believe, and now know is not true, that you can enjoy animal-based protein and simultaneously be supporting systems that have positive outcomes in ecosystems and for welfare of communities and for the health and wellness of consumers and the welfare and benefit of animals. And so anyway, that was the origin of the ethos of Epic. And then of course, Epic, we ended up, I'm getting ahead of myself because you were asking my connect, like what the story of this brand, and then the story of how I came to it. I came to it right about that time, right as it was transitioning from a vegan company to a meat bar. And basically my friends who I'd been keeping in touch with said, hey, wait a minute, this thing is, we're about 1 second in and it's already lapping the core business that's multiple years old. And we're having a hard time wrangling and this growth and the potential. And we think that, we want you to come help us scale this business and allow it to fulfill what it can be. And so that's how we joined forces and how I got to Epic, and why Epic was so much more inspiring me than some, traditional academic, seeming opportunity in the finance industry. This was like, wait a minute, we can go challenge conventional thinking around meat and support, people's health and performance and improve food systems and supply chains. Screw it, let's give it a go. And it wasn't. I found out pretty quickly that we were really early, and I think within my third day on the job, I found out we weren't going to be able to make payroll. So that was a little bit of a rude awakening, but it's been a happy story ever since. So,
how do you, on something like that, because as the demand grows and Epic really landed in a lot of places, how do you get the product? Because I feel like that's when you're doing it the way that you're doing it, and I want to talk about that even, now for Force of Nature, it's almost like there's sort of, is there a restraint? Because you can't just be like, okay, well, we're just going to get any product we need. Because of the way you're doing it, was there times where it was like, yeah, we don't have that as much meat or of that type, as we can't get our hands on the right kind?
Yeah, I think we're having to build supply chains as we grow. We did at Epic, and we are at Force of Nature. And a big, I mean, again, not to we're doing an interesting director's trick. We're walking through two timelines simultaneously here.
Yeah, sorry.
But I think one of the things we learned at Epic is that we could scale supply chains faster than consumer demand could appreciate what was available. And one of the things with Force of Nature is a direct and intentional focus on the consumer to help create awareness around the challenges in our food system and the challenges with the products that they're buying, and not disparaging, not telling people that they need to think or change their set of values. But I think the average consumer has a pretty clear understanding of what they desire, what their values are, and what they hope and what sort of system they expect to be involved in. And I would say complicit in supporting. And I think that when they buy things that say natural or grass-fed or organic or free range or pastured, whatever the claim is, their expectation exceeds reality, that the system is letting them down and misleading them to think that they're getting something that is better than they are. And I think the consumer is so powerful in this economy. And I mean, you look over all through history and time, and you look at how movements of people can change the course of history. And I think we're in one of those really unique moments where I think consumers just need to know the truth and transparency. And I think if we give them that, and then we demonstrate that, hey, there is an outlet that actually offers the things that you already value and that you already thought you were getting, and this is what it looks like, and it's called regenerative, and I can explain more, that many consumers would choose that path.
The baseline, no matter what you're doing, and especially if you're talking about food, and I just know this from even from our side, and it's very different and a lot easier, doing layered superfood than doing what you're doing, is the fight for high quality ingredients and margins and, just all of that conversation over and over. So that's why I was just curious at Epic, because they did grow. They did have a market penetration that was interesting. And I thought, this is really unique that they're able to do this. So I guess from that, I was trying to just understand that. So
well, I remember, and so that was the moral of what I was trying to say there, is that we figured out that we could scale those supply chains faster than demand. And so let's work on the demand generation. And that's where Force of Nature comes in. And I think taking that mission, some of those key, themes and concepts in the ethos of Epic and converting it from ounces to pounds, and meat as an industry is something like 98% household penetration. And you're looking at multiple meals a day or multiple occasions a day where somebody's consuming meat. The opportunity with small shifts and to have massive and positive impact is pretty encouraging. Very exciting.
It is. And I know this sounds strange, but I also feel like when you get the good stuff, you eat a lot less of it. If someone sends me something that they've hunted, or I get your brand, I eat a lot less of it. Because it's almost like whatever you need, it comes in a much smaller amount. I know that's maybe seems strange, but I feel
I don't think it is. We see it. I think Fred Provenza is an awesome guy. I wrote a book called Nourishment. It's like, how do animals know what to eat? They don't have written, text or language or science or health classes, but somehow they know what their body needs. We have those same mechanisms and that wisdom in us. And I think when we're eating food that is nutritionally dense, we don't require as much of it. And if our carrots have a fraction of the beta carotene or whatever that we're looking for, our body's going to tell us to eat more of them than we need. And I think that what you're saying, the science backs it.
Yeah, I find it, I kind of love it, because also I really enjoy, especially, high quality protein. I really enjoy it. I'm wildly iron deficient. I want it all the time. And I'm like, oh, I only need just a tiny amount. I have a friend named Kelly Starrett, and we joke that in the perfect world, it's like if you had the kind of animal protein that you offer at Force of Nature, the perfect diet is vegetarian with a condiment of, animal protein, pretty much. But so you go from Epic and you think, okay, we've learned all these lessons, and you decide to create Force of Nature.
Yes.
How do you put that together? And it's similar. Was there a period of time you weren't allowed to, was there a non-compete? Or is it just like, hey, and then is there a difference in kind of the description of like your regenerative? Like is Epic, is that the same thing or is it a little different? Like, was there something that you did also different in the sourcing of your protein?
The transition was, as I mentioned before, it's just a much bit, Epic, we sold bars and some broths and some jerky and some skins. And these are all, materially decent sized categories, but they're not meat. They're also shelf stable and shelf packaged, and we're not doing that. We don't have any intention to do that. We're looking to actually feed people, not give them snacks with this company. I think, portable, healthy nutrition has a role, no doubt. But I think, the 3 meals a day that most people are eating is a much bigger opportunity to drive impact and mission and change, and improve their circumstances as well as the circumstances of a broader group of stakeholders. So we're not competing with Epic, and so that was never an issue. The sourcing standards, though, I think we've elevated those. With Epic, it was, early on we were learning. It was sort of paleo movement, and then later on keto, certainly low glycemic and gluten free. These are all things that had come up, as had this idea of grass fed or 100% grass fed. And I think we were amongst some of the earlier people and brands to follow, to go down, I should say, the rabbit hole of regenerative and learn what that really was and meant. And so, I think with Epic, we learned so much through that period that by the time, we got to the end of our time with Epic, we had, we probably would go back and do some things differently. And we got the chance to do that with Force of Nature. I think you even mentioned protein. Right now we have very, very limited offerings of poultry or pork with Force of Nature, because those systems, it's almost like the smaller the animal, the more they take to industrialization, the more we can manipulate them through selective breeding, the more we can manipulate their environment, the somehow we justify more cruel treatment for them, and for us to find a minimum bar in those supply chains is challenging. It's just like I don't want to let perfection be the enemy of progress, but there's a certain standard I'm not willing to go below, and it's much more difficult to find that in those categories versus the ruminant proteins. And so ruminant being beef, bison, animals that eat grass and upcycle it into nutrition, which we can get into regenerative and why that's so important. But I think our sourcing standards have significantly gone up, and we're largely trying to drive change around regenerative.
So when people hear regenerative, and we're being very specific today with meat, but let's just say in farming, there's sort of these kind of principles that people are following, whether it's no tilling and trying to keep something planted as long as possible. I know that different guardrails get put up by different kind of regenerative farmers, where maybe to your best ability, if you could sort of blanket statement kind of the principles when it comes to regenerative, whether it is agriculture or what you guys are doing. And then what's the percentage of farms that are regenerative? It's like, I don't know, is it like it's under 1%, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it's negligible. It's under 1% in the States, but globally, I think 40% of agriculture is still subsistence farming. And when you're subsistence farming, you gotta be investing in your resource base. And it's only in the industrialized farming ways that we think we can extract from it indefinitely, and that it will continue to serve us.
Yeah.
There are some core principles of regenerative agriculture that I think are widely regarded and accepted. Mm-hmm. I'll start with this too, though. food systems rely on healthy land, and healthy land comes from diversity. It comes from plants and animals functioning in harmony. It's through the millennia of those cycles and relationships that our land bases had fertility instilled into them that we've been benefiting from. And we can either work with those cycles and try to emulate them, or we can try to break those cycles and mine that fertility. And I think that's sort of a core awareness that I think it's important to have. And I would also say you can do that. Plant agriculture does not deserve a free pass, and animal agriculture does not deserve a free pass. The industrial models, whether it's monocrop farming for corn and soy, where you kill everything on the land by tilling it, you kill everything by spraying it, then you spray 5 more times and you're running a tractor and there's no life. This is not healthy for the land or for any wildlife or for ecosystems or for waterways or pollinators or you. And that's how and why glyphosate's showing up in breast milk and urine. And I think similarly, when you look at, waste lagoons and animals piled on top of each other, living in environments that aren't compatible with life and are engineered where they don't even exhibit biological behaviors. And, again, all the things that you hear, represented as the challenges of animal agriculture, those also aren't appropriate in natural ecosystems. So it's not about plant-based or animal-based. I'd say it's about planet-based. Are we practicing agriculture in a way that actually works on the circle the globe that we live on? Those principles, now keeping in mind that this applies to animals and plants, there's 6 of them. And my co-founder Taylor and I we have a podcast called Where Hope Grows. And we did a podcast on these, and we spoke for almost 2 hours just on these. But the first one, I guess really no particular order, but the first one is limit chemical and mechanical disturbance. Mm-hmm. So tilling is really bad. Spraying for the land, spraying can be really bad. It can poison water. It can kill things. I mean, these are the things you don't want to do. So I'll try not to go too far into each one, because again, we could talk forever about it. But I think the next one is to leave the soil covered or armored. Bare soil gets really hot in the summer. It gets really cold in the winter. Life dies. Soil microbiology dies. You put a thermometer in the ground, it's 150 degrees. It's past the temperature needed to kill pathogens in food, if you think about that. So it also promotes wind and rain erosion, and it can cause capping, which can limit rain infiltration. Inversely, if you leave organic matter and dying, decaying stuff, that can actually feed the soil, and it can armor it and protect it from all of those things that I just listed off. Green growing plants with living roots year round. It's when plants are alive, photosynthesis is happening. When photosynthesis is happening, carbon is being mined out of the atmosphere and put into the soil. I think we have this misconception of carbon. Carbon is not our enemy. We are carbon-based life. You take the water out and we're carbon, and we need it, and our soil needs it, and our food systems have seen a significant loss of carbon as we've industrialized them, and we need that life, that building block of life in the soil. And what's going to in your health and my health and the health of what's above the soil is going to be a reflection of the health of what's beneath the soil. So we need carbon. We need plants doing the carbon exchange, the nutrient cycle, the energy cycle. They take the energy of the sun and they convert it into sugar for the soil. The water cycle, all of it relies on these things. And when we till and leave fields bare, none of that happens. Then diversity. Everything has a role. We live in an age of reductionism. We just wish we could just take life and distill it down in a series of a few rudimentary equations, and it doesn't work like that. It is the diversity, the complexity, and the for every undesirable pest species that you may spray an insecticide for, there's thousands of desirable species that could be mitigating against it and provide a positive impact. So why are you indiscriminately killing? And then the same thing with animals. And the next principle is animal impact. Mm-hmm. Most of the prime agriculture land is in grasslands, and most grasslands evolved with large herds of ruminant animals. And here in the States, we have the stories of bison roaming from Mexico to Canada. And you see Lewis and Clark's journals. It might take a day or a week for a herd of bison to move by millions of animals, tens of millions of animals. And you have to think that these land systems, before the bison was the large bison, before that was mammoths, these land systems and these grasses and these prairie systems evolved with these ruminant animals performing keystone, the keystone ecosystem services that they performed, being drivers of positive change. And so we need that contribution to a functioning ecosystem. We need animals just much like we need plants, much like we need insects, impacting our food systems. And then the last principle is context. You have to know your context. You can't be trying to produce tropical fruit in Alaska and or vice versa. And, if you're somebody that has, if you're a billionaire and you're just trying to do the right thing, you can pour capital into something to try to ignite change. If you're having trouble scraping 2 nickels together, but you got 10 kids, you have a whole lot of human horsepower that you can apply. And, some land systems get more rain than others, and some have, different. So I think just knowing that, like, hey, not everybody's going to be the same, and understanding where you have strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and limitations is really important. So I'd say those are the 6 most widely regarded fundamental tenets of regenerative agriculture. And if you look at, what nature does when we leave it alone, is it tries to do those things. And I think the challenge with rewilding and the challenge with the misconception that regenerative is just the absence of humans, just go backwards to how it was, take a step. That's not a reality. We've largely eliminated the bison. We've eliminated all of the predators that cause the bison to move. We've fenced in all the land. We've dammed up all the waterways. These natural systems can no longer function in their historical sense. And so there is a new reality where we can celebrate that wisdom of nature and bring those cycles back to life and work with them. But we have to do it with human ingenuity and technology and management. And I don't think it means technology in the sense of laboratories and chemicals and engineering as much as it means technology in the sense of how do we use our brilliance and our ingenuity to harmonize with these food systems and to make subtle adjustments that allow us to work with nature instead of against it. I mean, I think in a game where we're battling nature, I'm betting on nature.
I feel like change occurs when we're inspired. I don't actually think fear or, hysteria makes change. I think the inspiration for this feels like the truth, doing it this way so it's like when you see the truth, you're like, oh, this feels like something to follow. Are you hopeful that we can get enough people on board to see the value in that? Or how do we do that? Like, how does the regular person, the householder, maybe who's overwhelmed with life and family and jobs, what is it that they can do? But is it simply by purchasing the products, like meaning buying things that are doing it the right way? Like what are the things people can do? Because I think people, the minute they look at it and they go, oh my gosh, less than 1% it's happening. It takes time. It's more expensive. It's all of the things. It's what life is really, right? It's in certain ways harder that they get overwhelmed. So they just go, okay, I'm just not going to deal with it. What can we say to them? What's the invitation, and how do you guys, because you're doing it, but where does your hope come from that there's a future for this?
It sounds defeating to hear, especially when you think about the scale, and the scale is massive. I mean, the Earth is, I think, 30 billion acres or so not covered in ice, and I think we practice agriculture on 11 billion of those acres. The United States is like 2.2 billion acres. We practice agriculture on like 900 million. So think 50% of the United States is being managed for food production in some ways. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising. It's big, it's a lot, but when you fly, you look down, you see the checkerboard. It's not hard to imagine, but that scale, at that scale, bad is really bad. And it can cause a lot of harm. but at that scale, good is really good, and it can heal. And we know that the planet can heal fast, and we know that people can change. And I think, again, that's a big part of the reason why we're doing what we do at Force of Nature. I think that ties into the second part of your question. What can people do? I think for us, in this particular industry, in meat, for example, the call to action for consumers was really, really challenging. It was go read a bunch of books, go listen to a bunch of podcasts, educate yourself, figure out how to validate what is and isn't regenerative, because it is a term that is being thrown around loosely and actively being greenwashed. And understand what it is truly, and determine your own value set, and then go subsequent to that and find a place that's offering, that's practicing those and offering what you're looking for. And if they're doing that for vegetables, great. Then go find another place doing it for beef, and then go find another place doing it for pork, and so on. And I think people should do that. I'm not saying don't do that, but the masses, they're the people that are willing or able to do that are fewer and further between than the folks who have good intentions but are busy, and that's just asking a bit much. And I think, so for Force of Nature, we're trying to be a brand that you can form a relationship with and will be familiar at a national scale across proteins. So we'll have, whether if you want bison, or you want beef, or if you want a breakfast sausage, or you want a steak for dinner, or you want a hot dog to feed your kid for lunch, that's honoring these sourcing standards and so on. We do it in retail. You can walk into a grocery store and buy it. You can order it online. We'll ship it to your door. You can walk into a restaurant, and a lot of restaurants are serving our products. And so the whole point was, as I mentioned earlier, awareness about these important issues, and then access, so that there's actually something that you can do about it. Easier than prior. And I say often, I'll say again, I think we're the third best source of meat. I think the best source is, to actually go through a really trying and challenging physical and emotional journey to harvest your own, and struggle and fail and appreciate the abundance that we have, and appreciate, the sacrifice that it takes, all around to create animal protein. And to form that relationship in a truly human and an evolutionary sense with that food, and a reverence and a respect and appreciation for it when you feed your family or your community with it. I think the second best source is that you either have a regenerative farm, or you have a regenerative farm next door. You can do it. You can support that person locally. If you have a farmer at a farmer's market that's doing this, buy their products, not Force of Nature. I mean, it's easy to say, use your own, grow your own, or support your community. But for a lot of folks that, as I mentioned before, that aren't quite there and aren't quite sure, Force of Nature is a great option. And that's where we try to be. And we're doing everything we can to raise the bar all the time.
Let's say, I'm going to make it up, Kirkland, Costco, whatever. I don't know which is the mothership of that, but they sell a ton of meat. And how would a company like that I think I think it's like a 15% sort of markup from whatever their cost is. That's it. I think something like that. Could one of those big guys, could they pull it? Could they do it? Even if it was just, okay, one part of our cold section meat is this type of meat. Is this possible?
Yeah. I mean, if the question is regenerative agriculture scalable, the answer is absolutely yes. If the question is if there's willingness and intention or desire from large players like Costco, the answer is also yes. I think that they see, one of the interesting things around meat and animal agriculture is conversation's never been more amplified. It's part of meat is now a part of the public discourse. It's not just something that you go to the store to buy. It's something that the news reports on, and companies emerging into the scene get talked about, and articles are written. And so I think that it's on notice. And I think, I think the incumbency is on notice. I think there's a really interesting thing that has happened with meat. And I think it happens with commodities in general. This celebration of price above all else at the expense of all else. There was a race to the bottom with meat. And simultaneously, there's been a food revolution occurring, and it started in the center of the store. Things that come in boxes started to put claims on the package and started to make promises about values to consumers. And consumers said, hey, wait a minute, more than I care about how much I pay, and I care about the convenience, and I care about if it tastes good, but I also care about if it's healthy. And I also care about if it's supporting a cause that I'm aligned with and that I value. And that movement has begun to permeate into the perimeter of the store. It's happened in dairy and yogurt and eggs. And I think it hasn't happened yet in meat, but we're trying to help catalyze that. At the end of the day, nobody's going to make a product a consumer won't buy. They're not going to do it. It doesn't matter if it's Kirkland Costco, like you said, or JBS Tyson Cargill. They're going to make what consumers want. Historically, with meat, consumers were sort of a cog in their machine. We were good little soldiers, buying what we were told to buy, how we were told to buy it, valuing what we were told to value. And I think when you look at the trends, when you look at what's happening in the conversation around meat, there's starting to be a little bit more awareness, a little bit more accountability. And I don't think, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, I choose not to believe that there's individual people in those organizations that are just pure evil. I think that they have incentives that motivate them to make choices that are entirely profit driven, which is their fiduciary duty to their board at the expense of other constituencies. And I think the consumer should be able to hold them accountable for that. I think they should be able to respond and do better. And I think when you look at the race to the bottom that I mentioned, nobody asked the consumer, hey, we're going to abuse this animal forever going forward, and it's going to save you 25 cents. Would you accept that abuse, or would you prefer to just pay 25 cents more? I think the overwhelming majority of consumers would have said, oh yeah, no, I won't make that trade-off, and I won't make the trade-off that compromises my health, and I won't make the trade-off. The truth is, the consumer was left out of the calculus. And I think what we're trying to do is let the consumer come back in and say, hey, I don't want cheap food. I want food that is valuable. And I want food that reflects the true cost. Because I would argue that the cheapest food in the grocery store is probably the most expensive. We just don't see those costs directly reflected on the sticker. Cheap meat, commodity meat, the average consumer pays for it 3 times. You pay for it in your tax dollars, you pay for it at the register, and then you pay for it in the form of the hidden externalities, the land degradation, the health costs that you're deferring to the future, the human toll for the workers in those systems, and so on and so forth. And I don't think that those should be hidden costs. I think that we should have the true cost truly reflected. And I think value should be brought back into the center stage of the conversation around food. And so should nutrient density, like you mentioned, and the health component. And so I think all of that gives me, going back to your earlier question, hope, because I think I know I'm a consumer. You're a consumer. I see it every day. I truly believe that consumers want something different than they're getting. I know that it is available and scalable. And I know that if consumer has has the opportunity to send a signal into the markets, those large incumbents will respond.
Let's say you have a big, large area, in particular, vegetables and plants, herbs, what have you. Is there a way? What is the way that you can, kill menacing either weeds or other plants without spraying? Is it possible?
It requires a mindset. It is possible. And I think it requires a mindset shift. I would say, are the plants and weeds really menacing, or are they performing an ecosystem service that you should be paying attention to? And they're telling you something. Are they telling you there's toxins in the soil that the thistle are helping to remove, much like when you drink thistle tea? Is there a lack of some sort of element that is needed? Are they, what are those quote unquote weeds doing? It's biology. It's there for a reason. Nature has selected for it to put it in that place to do a job. And so is there an alternative that you could plant to do that same job and then harvest as a crop, or plant in lieu of buying nitrogen fertilizer, right? Could you plant some legumes or or turnips or some other nitrogen. The atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. Why are we buying nitrogen and spraying it on the land with tractors when there's plants that harvest that nitrogen and put it in the ground? And so there is a lot of things that you can do. And then there's a piece of equipment called a no-till drill or a no-till tractor. And it goes through, and it doesn't, a typical tractor with a disc that's tilling has these discs that are kind of, shaped at angles, and they dig into the ground to a preset depth, and they lift everything up and turn it over. And that really disrupts the fungal networks, all of the soil life. It exposes them, it oxidizes them, which causes carbon release. If you look at the Kiss the Ground documentary, you look at the images of carbon being released in the atmosphere during all the seasons where they're tilling, you get a sense of how some of this works. Alternatively, there's a thing called a no-till drill, which just runs a single blade, very, very, not deep at all into the ground. It just sort of just slightly creates a little bit of a crease and an opening, drops the seed in, and then a wheel rolls behind it and closes it. And in a lot of landscapes, you can't even see where that has run. And it's run through living matter. And then, whatever you've planted, whether it's a cover crop or whether it's a crop you're harvesting, comes from it. I think Gabe Brown has done a ton of work in this area of creating a lot of stuff. And you end up with, to your point about undesirables, you can outcompete them with desirables. And you can have in a single planting 10 or 15 revenue streams coming out of there, or 5 revenue streams and 3 things that are cost saving, like nitrogen fixing plants. And so there's a lot of ways to do that, up to and including in the end, instead of tilling all of it in, running animals on it and letting them eat the excess and drop, trample it down so the biology on the soil can convert it back into more healthy soil, and dropping manure and urine to nourish that soil, and just having, again, honoring those principles of regenerative like we were talking about.
Are there any big guys showing up being a little heroic in this space, whether it's an individual person or a company? Is anyone kind of really sticking their neck out and sort of going for it, or is it just groups of people like yourselves and the other people that founded Force of Nature with you, just kind of coming together and trying to create these networks and and a consumer? Or are there any big guys who are making moves?
Yeah, I think the answer is both. Again, I mentioned earlier that I think momentum is gaining steam. If you look at the studies of consumers, it would say that regenerative is gaining popularity faster than organic did. It took organic 20 years, 30 years to get to where it is. But, I don't want to wait 20 or 30 years for regenerative, but it is encouraging. There are other companies doing regenerative. And it's a term that you just start to see thrown around more and more and more and more. And there is a groundswell. There's not-for-profits, Kiss the Ground, Savory Institute, so many others. I think, there are government entities. There is an international movement, and then yes, there are large businesses. General Mills, PepsiCo, Danone. They've all made regenerative commitments. I think the challenge is, A, will they actually follow through on those commitments, and B, what form will regenerative take when they try to match their audacious commitment with reality, and how will it be watered down and potentially greenwashed? And I think that's where there's a little bit of a race to establish a definition or an awareness, or to raise the bar as high as possible before there becomes an incentive to start lowering it, and to maybe ensure that there's more transparency so that lowering it becomes more challenging. So again, I think, it's hard to convince consumers to just turn a package around and pay attention to the number of ingredients that are in it, and if they can even pronounce them. To tell them to hold folks accountable to a true definition of regenerative, I think is a big ask. I would say the easier ask is demand transparency. Your eyes won't lie to you. If somebody's saying they're regenerative, great, show me. If that looks like regenerative to you, if it looks like your ideal vision of a utopian food system, then fantastic. If it looks like the same old thing with a fancy word slapped on the label and a little bit of earthy tone rebranding, then it's probably bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, I find that with organic, and, I see that so often it becomes trendy, and then everyone's like, oh, great. How do I jump on that? Can we slide over just talking a little bit about kind of the importance of carbon and even, I do find it fascinating the last 5 years how everyone's all of a sudden so just, obsessed and, with climate change. Now, somehow they managed to make this super popular and political, and now everyone is all concerned about climate change, which the reason that I won't say that it bothers me, but the reason it maybe concerns me is because even if it's true, it feels more like a trend versus, no, let's really understand. And instead, how are we going to fix it? And rather than yelling back and forth at each other, it's like, what are the systems in place, i.e. regenerative farming, that could actually support truly climate change, not, some of the things that get just thrown out there in this kind of sweeping conversation. So a really simple thing about carbon and how it impacts, the air of the world that we live in and climate change. I mean, it's a really important part of all of this.
I think I share your sentiments if I'm hearing you correctly. I don't like the politicization of it. I don't like the polarization. I think the climate is changing. I think the climate has changed a lot over history, and we've since the last ice age, we've been on a warming trend. The question is, how much have we deviated from, and how much have we done, and can we do to affect that? I hate that. When I think about climate change, I also think about the fact that small precipitation and climate is controlled by moisture and organic matter in our soils. And so I'm thinking that, like, hey, we're causing climate change because we've disrupted so much of the land mass that should be supporting our weather cycles. I think about beyond even climate, though. I think about the life expectancy declining and fertility declining and loss of pollinators and the acidification of oceans and the fact that we lose 1% of insect species every year. And I mean, there's a complex web of these large existential crises. And I just don't like the reductionist thinking that brings us. It's like, the science is settled. It's only one thing, and it's this, and there's one solution only. And no, I think we need to have discussion and debate, and we need to, honestly address these challenges. I think so many of them tie back to agriculture and the disruption that we have caused. And I think that is where I would say some of the questions that you've asked have been like, well, can this work? Is it scalable? And I would say, I've told people just in this conversation alone, hey, challenge convention, stop and pause and think critically about it. And I would challenge the premise of some of your questions. And I would say, can the existing system work? And I think the answer to that is no. I think that the existing system has a shelf life, and we're coming towards the end of that, and we have an illusion of choice. Change is going to be thrust upon us, or we can willingly and consciously make that change now. And I think regenerative is in a lot of the things we've been talking about today is the best course. It's most cost effective. It's what the system is set up for. It doesn't require any major, incremental effort or new novel technology. It's just some subtle shifts and changes along the way. Around carbon specifically, I think 30 or 40% of the legacy load of carbon in the atmosphere right now that is man-made is from tilling. So we talk about running cars and we talk about transportation and enteric emission and burps of cattle maybe. The reality is when you run a disc in the ground and you turn it over and it oxidizes, like I said, you release carbon into the atmosphere. And 40% of the human-caused load in the atmosphere is because we till to grow crops. Too many of those crops get fed to animals that shouldn't be eating them, but you go to the grocery store, you see corn on the ingredient deck of everything in a box, and so it's we're part of that as well. I think so you look at like where are the sources of this carbon coming from. The other thing is, how does carbon end up in the soil? Why should carbon be in the soil? What is this guy talking about? And I mentioned photosynthesis earlier. This is sort of maybe a refresher for some of us from 4th or 5th grade, and that's about as deep as my understanding goes, and my qualifications permit me to share. But I think everybody understands that a plant brings in CO2, like we bring in oxygen and exhale CO2, plants bring in CO2 and release oxygen. Well, what's actually happening? Well, the plants are taking the energy from the sun and that CO2 that we're talking about, and they're bringing it into the plant. They're turning sugars, they're energizing themselves. They release some of the sugars into the ground. It feeds a complex web of life down there where this is the currency. The exudates and the contributions that these plants make, converting energy of the sun and all of the incredible elements in our atmosphere into usable nutrition and resources that goes into the soil. The plant does all that, and then it releases back out oxygen, right? Well, CO2 in, O2 out, what's left behind? The carbon. And so when I hear about all these crazy technologies and carbon bricks that don't ever, that last 1,000 years, and how are we going to harvest and mine all this? I'm like, oh no, we're getting it so wrong. Like this is the reductionist quandary that we end up in, because we may have excess carbon in the atmosphere. We definitely have a lack of carbon in our food production systems and our soils. We have degraded soils. Our soils are not living they're not thriving. They're not fulfilling their potential. And it means that they can't fulfill their potential to feed, the omnivores and herbivores and us and carnivores and so on and so forth. And so, I don't know if that was a good answer to your question. And if you want to rephrase the question, I'll happily dig into nerd out on science, but
no, it is, because here's one of my, things that I just go, wow, people are, the planet and climate change and all that, but nobody ever really, or very few people will take the time to dig down and just learn a little bit to form their own personal opinion. And then before you know it, everyone's sort of barking at each other, versus, like you said, if we started with our food source and the way that we grew food, it would take care so much of us and the planet. Like that, for me, as a starting point, seems pretty practical. Like, oh, well, why don't we pay more attention to that? We can fight about, your pronouns and whatever other stuff people want to fight about. But if we could actually take care of our planet and our own physical bodies, starting with how we are getting our food, it seems like a win, to me. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. I'd have to ask about two types of meat, just because I'm curious. And what's funny is sometimes, because, like this whole thing of how even this has become politicized, like vegan, vegetarian, people who eat meat, it's like, the word meat comes out of my mouth, and I've almost been like trained to be like, here we go. I want to be clear. I think if people just ate real food, and if they decide to be vegan or vegetarian, just figure out how to supplement here and there, to cover some of those gaps. That's really the interesting. I mean, Zach Brown said it perfectly. He's like, people are healthier. Oh, I'm paleo, or I'm keto, or I'm, vegan. It's like, no, you're just eating real food, like whatever that is. And that's why you're feeling better. So that is really where I stand. I think people should do whatever feels good to them. But I'm curious, you guys are big on organ meat.
It's some of the most nutritionally dense food on the planet. On what you get, I don't want to. I was talking to Chris Kresser the other day, and I'm going to misstate this, so take this as directional, and then go do the research. But I think he was looking at. You mentioned iron deficiency. I think B12, folate, magnesium. I'm trying to think of there's like a top 6 vitamin deficiency just in the United States. And then somebody did a study that said how much, what are the foods that are most dense in those, and how much would you have to eat to give yourself the daily allowance? And further, is it actually bioavailable? Just because you consume iron in one form doesn't mean you can make any use of it at all, let alone an efficient or a good use of it. And so they did the study, and I think it showed the most nutrient dense forms and the best form of food to address the majority of vitamin deficiencies, which women suffer from more than men. And in the United States, is organ meat. It's something like 12 calories of liver versus I forget what it was. It was like 100 servings of spinach to get the same amount of iron, that in a bioavailable form. And so I'm not pitting plants against animals. I'm just saying these organ meats are incredible. And I think when you read history and you look back, or you look to the animal kingdom, you look to nature for wisdom, you see that these would have been the most highly selected for cuts. When you read stories of Native Americans on the land, the first thing they would do is go and try to eat the liver, or even the pelt hunters who, I don't agree with what they did or why they were doing it, but that would be what they were living on. You look to nature, you look at, animals taking down carcasses, they go straight for the organs first. And so, I think there's a lesson there. And for us, it's not to say that we're like organ zealots, but when you sacrifice an animal's life, which is to say, when you kill an animal, you take its life, you honor every part of that animal. And so there's a nutritional component to it. There's a reverence for the animal and the sacrifice component to it. And I think there's also this part where we look at, life expectancy is declining. We've never been less healthy and more disconnected from our food. And so I think, paying attention and responding to the obvious and trying to introduce. So like to your point, organ meats, we have a line of products we call our ancestral blend. We call it our ancestral blend because it introduces organ meats in a subtle blend that you probably won't notice. So it's sensitive to the modern palate and recognize that people are intimidated by organs, but it brings in enough for you to get the nutritional benefit of them. So it's like you can feed it to your kids and they won't know that it's there. And we call it the ancestral blend because that's how our ancestors would have eaten. Frankly, there's like 20 pounds of liver for every 400 pounds of meat. So it's not like we need to eat pounds and pounds of liver a day. We just need a little bit. And so we're just trying to honor all of those elements in some of the food that we offer.
I really appreciate that. Do you have your favorite way that you prepare it or consume it?
Yeah, honestly, not in some fancy, chef style. I think for us, it's how fast and convenient can we make it. And so the ground meat form is forgiving and flexible. And honestly, it's incredibly cost effective. So what I'll do is I'll take a pound or a brick, as we call it, of ground ancestral beef or bison or venison, making some venison tonight, actually. And I'll take, a bag of frozen organic vegetables. And I'll make a stir fry. And it takes 15 minutes. It costs something like $6 a serving. And it is wildly healthy. And as you pointed out earlier, satiating. And you can't eat a meal at 7-Eleven for that. You can't eat a meal at a fast food restaurant for that. It is, I know that people, again, challenging what we've been conditioned to believe. I know people think that our, regenerative meat or grass-fed meat is expensive. It is not. Our meat is 55 cents an ounce for our beef. Ruffles potato chips are $1.10 an ounce. We are half as expensive as we identify Ruffles as cheap and this premium meat is expensive. It's just a disconnection that we have. And so, I would say, I like to make meatballs. I'll make hamburgers. I'll do the stir fries. I just try to find ways to do things that are quick and easy and convenient, that nourish our family, that still taste good. And I hope others can learn from that and not be intimidated by the product or not fear the price, because again, it is so much cheaper than you realize to actually nourish yourself.
And that's what I wanted. I just want people to not be intimidated because they think, oh, organ meat. It's like, no, it's completely user friendly. You can incorporate it the way you cook with anything. And so I just want
ground meat. Brent's same exact thing. Any recipe, your favorite recipe, do that.
That's right. I mean, you can make a bolognese if you want. Okay. So
I make spaghetti. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, I would be remiss not to ask your feelings about this 3D, meat. Like now they're, making lab meat, laboratory meat. I don't know about you, but I do find it fascinating that we sort of romanticize technology to the degree that we're like, yeah, never mind how it is in nature, that it's done in sort of a perfect way. Let's put a ton of resources towards doing lab meat. I mean, do we think this is actually going to get off the ground?
It's not off to a good start. They've raised a lot of companies have raised a lot of money.
I know.
I think what challenges me with it is, I'm fundamentally on team nature, like I said, and we have this perfect system that doesn't necessarily produce billionaires, so we turn our backs to it. And then we've turned to a system that food can become intellectual property, and the ability to make that food and the raw materials for that food and the whole supply chain can be vertically controlled. And then you can even take it and force it upon third world countries and remove their sovereignty. And the potential for evil goes on and on and on. And I really question the claims. I question the intent. I question the authenticity of the people behind it. Because none of it makes sense to me. It's not, I did a podcast where I kind of did a debate with somebody from Impossible Foods. That's not lab based. It's a different thing.
No, it's just a bunch of the amount of ingredients in Impossible Foods and the types of ingredients. It's like they say, it may be like you're not killing an animal, but it isn't good for your health. Those combinations of oils and what have you. It's not like, hey, that's going to be good for your health. I don't know.
Well, to your point, eat real food and cook it yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't need to take real food and then convert it through a series of complex, again, proprietary science based on plants and equipment and machinery and a bunch of shipping and more fossil fuels burning and all these things into a different form. Just if the original form is good, then use good enough to use as a raw material or a base component, then just use the original form. Meat, I think this idea that we have to replace meat now with stuff grown in dishes and labs, I think you can pierce the veil on some of the ethical claims that they're making. If it's coming from row crop sugar that you're feeding it, or what antibiotics are being put in there for an alternative to an immune system, or like all these things break down really quickly when you challenge them. And I think a lot of this comes from this thing that we do as humans, which is fear our mortality and not want to acknowledge it or own it. And it's like, look, and also this thing that we do where we try to distance ourselves from nature, like, oh, there's nature and maybe I might go experiment in it for a minute. But we forget that we are part of nature. We are animals. And life and death, we love the harmony and the circle of life and the beauty, and we admire and romanticize it, except for that death part. And we try to distance ourselves from it. And I think nature is not cruel. Nature is not kind. Nature just is. And there's a balance and it goes on. And we just have a really difficult time accepting that. And so we try to avoid any form of acknowledgement of death. And I think that's a mistake, and it leads us astray. And this is just one more example of us going down a path that really makes no sense.
I really, appreciate that. Can people go to Rome Ranch? Are they able to go and check out Rome Ranch, or is that sort of?
Yeah, you want to go?
Me, eventually, I do. I want to go.
We'd love to have you.
Okay.
Yeah. So Rome Ranch, Force of Nature. I'm a co-founder. My two co-founders, Katie and Taylor. We're all at Epic together. Katie and Taylor bought a ranch. They own it. It's not part of Force of Nature. It's actually part of our supply chain. We source from them like we do dozens and hundreds of other ranches. It is an hour west of Austin in a town called Fredericksburg. And, they effectively created a living regenerative operation. It's a field experiment. It's an educational facility. They host thousands of people a year. I would say, like, they do school tours. They do bison calf tours. My favorite events, and what I would try to get you to come out for, would be either a turkey harvest or a bison harvest. And that's pretty intense. But I think it is a part of rekindling and refostering those connections that we've been talking about having lost in the modern world, that are truly fundamentally human. And a bison harvest is truly that. A community of people comes out and we harvest a bison, and you see it get shot, and then you see it be broken down, and you participate at it. And I think it's a remarkable experience because it is hard, it is trying, it gives you a true understanding and appreciation of everything that we've spoken about in this conversation. But then you also go through this emotional journey where the weight of that turns into an appreciation and a celebration of life. And I think that's that, going back to that fear of death, we only focus on the death. We don't focus on the fact that it takes death to sustain life in every form. Animals thrive on the decaying dead matter that, that put the soil and the nutrients into the ground. So just like we are omnivores and carnivores eat animals. And so I think that journey and that appreciation and people often, there are tears in the beginning and there are smiles and laughter in the end. I think doing that in a communal setting where you're seeing others go through a similar process. And I think there's a tribal component to it, that like the whole being in this community and gathering and harvesting and producing food together. And the same thing with the turkey harvest. The difference in the turkey harvest is every person goes and picks up their own turkey, and they actually do the kill step themselves and then break it down themselves. And that face that you're making is exactly why I think that's the perfect event for you. Because I think it causes us to confront many necessary things. And then on the other end of that, we do that around, Rome does that around Thanksgiving. You take that food home and you never look at a turkey in plastic at a grocery store the same ever again. You recognize the life behind that and the story that life had and the opportunity it had to live its potential on the land. And when you take that bird that you just harvest at home, you tell everybody you know about it. And when you feed them, you don't waste one morsel. That animal does not become part of the 40% food waste that gets thrown in the garbage can. It's like you have a deep and fundamental connection to that food. And I think those are so many things that we're missing in life. And so those are some of my favorite things that anybody can sign up for.
I really love that. And I think it's more honest. I say that all the time. I'm like, it's not honest if I'm willing to eat it, but I wouldn't be willing to kill it. That would be hypocritical. Like, oh, don't tell me where it comes from. Just bring it to me. And so I really thought about that. And listen, before all of this, it was like shelter and finding food. That's really what we've been concerned with. And we have complicated our lives. I understand it. I enjoy parts of that progress. I'm talking to you through a screen, through like it's amazing. However, I think to your point, when we get back to some of these rudimentary things, it's so fulfilling in a way because it does reach and touch our biology. So I really appreciate your time. I am so grateful for what you're doing at Force of Nature. And if you could direct everybody, Robby, to all the places that they can find you or the brand or the podcast, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. forceofnaturemeats.com is the website. You can read our blogs, learn more about us there, buy products if you want. We have a store finder if you're looking for where we're available in retail, because that's your preferred way of shopping. Then at Force of Nature Meats on Instagram. I believe we have a YouTube channel. It's probably something similar to that. And then our podcast is called Where Hope Grows. And we do that in combination with Rome Ranch. And Taylor is one of my co-founders, is one of the best storytellers I know, and he does a fun job with that. So those would be the places I'd send folks to.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you want to learn more, there is a ton of valuable information on my website. All you have to do is go to GabrielleReece.com or head to the episode show notes to find a full breakdown with helpful links to studies, research, books, podcasts, and so much more. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and send them to @Gabby Reece on Instagram. And if you feel inspired, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Laird Superfood. In 2015, Laird Superfood was created, but it was really actually created in my kitchen by my husband, Laird. And he was always experimenting with coffees and other ingredients for performance. And lo and behold, Laird Superfood was born. And we have beautiful coffees and creamers and protein bars and other things. But one of the things I'm very excited about is our new greens product. A lot of Americans are not getting enough fruits and vegetables. Something like 85% are not getting enough vegetables and 80% are not getting enough fruit. And we need fiber. So for me personally, I'm always trying to encourage people, and I know this is Laird's philosophy as well, is real food, right? Let's try to get as much of the good stuff, the minerals, the nutrients, the macro, the micronutrients from real food. But it's hard to do. Our soil's different. People are busy. Maybe you don't know what you're getting at your grocery store. So this is a way to get it done and bridge some of those nutritional gaps. And what I also really appreciate about it, besides that it tastes good, I just do it in water first thing in the morning. Then I'm done. And then I actually go and have my coffee after. But we use upcycled fruits and veggies, so things that won't go to waste. Maybe they're not really pretty, so we use them in our fruits and veggies. We use no fillers. So your body actually knows what to do with the ingredients. They know how to absorb it. There's fiber. And also, we never use any artificial or natural flavors. This is something that is harder than people realize, because to amplify flavors, a lot of times even, using natural flavors is the way to do it. So I'm excited to share with you. And if you'd like to try it out, all you have to do is go to layeredsuperfood.com. And if you punch in the code Gabby, Gabby 20, you will receive 20% off.